Walter.
Hi, Stephanie. You can hear me, obviously?
I can hear you. Looking good.
Yep. Hi, Kate.
You'll need to make me a host or something. I just tried to share screen, so
right. Share screen. How do we do this?
Make me a host if you just.
Right. That's why we're here early. There we go.
always some sort of glitch or something, you know?
Yep. Make host. There you go.
Okay. All right.
Yep. You are the host now.
Okay. All right.
Which also means
that should work. Okay.
I think you need to do the recording. We are recording already.
You are recording already?
Yep.
All right. I will. Okay, recording is in progress, so take it away, Walter.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to, I think this is our fourth installment of Zoom Ahoy. Mm-hmm. And this installment, actually, Kate, if you could put yourself on mute, because we're recording you right now in your house. Why are we still seeing Kate?
She's on mute. Yeah, she's
okay, fine. There we go. There we go. So this is our fourth installment of Zoom Ahoy, and the title of this one is Island Voices. This is a project that Suzanne and the Friends of the Boston Harbor Islands have been working on for years, actually, gathering up the oral and other sometimes written history as well of people like us, just regular people that have spent time out on the islands. And our speaker again tonight is Stephanie Schorow, well-known author, writer, journalist. And so let's get us started. We have a small crowd this evening. We are recording this and it will be posted up on our Facebook page as well as the Friends of the Boston Harbor Islands webpage once we have time to do so. Okay?
Great.
Take it away,
Stephanie. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Like Walter said, like Walter said, this Island Voices is actually a project. Let's see, I think, Pat, you got to put yourself on mute just for a little while, and then we'll let you speak, okay? So we will, what I'm doing is I am going to explore why this project is so important. In other words, oral history. What is this all about? And what I've done today, and we'll get started in just a sec, I've created a little movie of some of the videos that Suzanne and some other people have been collecting with some photos, and then we'll go into some other places that we find oral history. So let me share my screen, first of all. This is always a little crazy when this does it because I got to make sure it works. And then let me start the show. Okay, and I may have to pause to make sure everybody can hear it because there'll be a movie. So I think I know most of you, but for those who haven't, I'm an author. I live in the Boston area. I've written a number of books about Boston history. And I've sort of, one of my books is about the Boston Harbor Islands. And I also helped out with the 40th anniversary booklet for the Friends. So today we're going to be looking at this issue of how to tell the history of the Boston Harbor Islands, which is the theme of all these different talks. And today we're going to go into memories and other oral histories. We can even include written histories in that. So let me start. I'm going to play about a 14-minute video. Oops, if I can get to it. And give me a thumbs up if you can hear. Okay, so hold on. Here we go.
What your name is, what brings you out here?
Yeah, Jerry McVeigh from Newton, Mass. I spent all my summers from the time I was, I don't know, maybe 1 until I was 6 years old, from 1935 to like 41, maybe 42, I'm not sure. And stayed here with my family during the week with my grandmother, my mother, my grandfather, my aunt. And then on the weekends, my father and my uncles would come back from work with the supplies for the week on a Friday, after late afternoon or early evening. Then they would go back to work Monday morning. It was a great place, and it's nice, except that they've kind of let some of the shrubs grow too big, so now all the great views are gone. I remember from my sun porch with a World War I anti-aircraft gun telescope, watching the real sailboat race in Boston Harbor. You couldn't do that today. Yeah.
Where was your house here?
Good question. I don't really know. It was either on the, here, facing Boston Harbor, or the other little drumlin facing Boston.
How did you come to have the house? I mean, how did it come to
it was like generations. They were squatters, but with permission. And generations, they all knew everybody else. They were all close friends. Everybody was buddy with, they would roast snow.
So in the 1900s, when they were first built, I mean, was it in your family? I mean, did it start in your family and then get that started?
I'd say probably, I don't know about the other houses, but ours probably started maybe, I don't know, maybe 1910 or so.
Did you own the house per se, or did you just rent it?
Neither. I mean, we built it and we lived in it. I don't think there was any rent involved, and there was no, you purchased the materials.
It's in the brochure that people paid a $5 fee to the city of Boston. You remember that? You remember paying the fee?
No, I didn't. I let my father do it.
I don't remember any of that. They wouldn't let me know any of the finances. Being 5 or 6 years old.
So during World War I, did your family have to evacuate it? I mean,
I don't know if the family was even out there in World War I. I think they were, but I don't know. I mean, they used to tell me stories about how the island was pretty much hollow.
Yeah.
And that you could go down these. I see they're closed. 30 years ago, they still were here. These openings that you could take a ladder and go down.
Oh, these openings? Like
they were right the ground.
There's one over there?
Well, no, you can't see them now. They're all been grown over.
There's a couple of things, but I thought they were
right here and down there.
Yeah. You climbed down the holes and went into
the little holes. There were ladders, metal ladders in there. You go all the way down to where the railroad things were.
My name is Tom Hayden. I'm from Chelmsford, Massachusetts. And my aunt and her husband, who was in the Army around 1950 and 51, were the caretakers of the island at that time. And I was about 10 or 11 at the time, and used to spend summers, sometimes, not complete summers, but summertimes, and other times of the year actually with them out here. And they lived in a couple of barracks that were, I think, located where those concrete foundations are right now. I think those are the two. At the time, they didn't have the full complement of barracks that had been built during World War II. There were two of them. One they stayed in as their private house, and the one behind it was sort of a general building. And they would come out here by boat, usually on Monday, and go back to Boston, where they stayed with my aunt's family in Roxbury on the weekends. And they would ship another soldier out on the weekends to give them a spell off the island. At the time, I don't think there was telephone communications, but they did have radios. Because one of my uncle's responsibilities was to call Fort Banks and Winthrop a couple of times a day just to check in, let them know everything was okay. Because at that time, the other drumlin where they had the bunker located was still active. And that was the part that had been set up to blow up various installations around the harbor during World War II. And there were just row after row after row of switch panels. And he would go in there and make sure everything was working correctly. So I assume that even in 1950, 51, it was equipped to do something, blow up the harbor, whatever. They had a dog out here named Bum. They used to roam the island. And Bum one time caught a bad, he used to catch seagulls. One time I think he caught a diseased seagull that died. But as the other guys said, the thing I noticed the most is that there was no vegetation hardly at all. I think there was one tree up here someplace at that time. And all of this is nice. You miss being able to see. You can't even look out, see anything nowadays. It's really a shame. He had a little truck on the island at that time. He used to drive from the barracks down to the bunker or all around. And there was a little dock at that time, a little wharf running out. And he used to make sure it was running. There was a red light, I think, blinking red light at the end of the wharf. And one time we were out here and during a heavy fog, it would grow snow. Used to have at that time a sightseeing boat. It's kind of an ugly looking little green thing, kind of low and squat. And I think their engine had quit and they were slowly drifting out to sea. And they saw the red light at the end of the wharf and managed to get the boat over to the island. And the whole crew, all the passengers, every girl, Snow and his mother disembarked and spent, I don't know, a day or two until they could get things running again and get back into the harbor. But one of the ways they entertained themselves, Edward Rose Snow's mother played the zither. And so she played the zither and entertained everybody. And I think there was another time, there was a Boston cop and his buddy who were out fishing for the day. And they had a similar thing, they were drifting out there. And this was the last thing they saw before they headed out to the middle of the ocean. But it was a great place to be for a kid, 10 or 11 years old out here. You know, an Emmy installation, nobody was supposed to be here. You could go in the bunkers, you could crawl all around. It was just fun. And we used to have a family out here. They'd come out on Sundays and have a cookout or whatever. We used to walk over to Boston Light, low tide. We walked out here on the spit over here at low tide. It was the first time I ever heard the word spit used other than expectorate. I never knew what it was before. So that was it. That's why I came back, just to see what it's like.
My name is Jim St. Croix.
My name is Sandy Roberts. I'm Sue St. Croix.
And our grandparents summered here up until World War II. We're not entirely sure when they started. We're thinking 20 years maybe they were doing this.
A long time.
And our mother and our uncle were fortunate enough to spend summers out here during that whole time. None of us, we're all too young to have participated in any of that. I did get out here once with my grandfather and parents and my grandmother. After World War II, we had a clam bake out here, basically, but I don't remember very much about it. I'm going to try and talk a little bit. You can talk a little bit.
This was the island romance at one level for our parents, because our mother met our father here because his best friend, Jack Crowley, came here every summer. And that's where they happened to be here and they happened to meet. So even though they were all from East Boston, this is where they met. Some of my mother talked about, when she did talk about here, it was out, you know, they loved this island. They managed to be busy playing as kids all the time. And they'd talk about how they'd never eat a mussel because those were only for the poor or the desperate because they had clams, and how Grandma was always doing nice things for the local fishermen who'd come by. So she always got lobsters and things out of them. And it was we met one woman here last.
Tell me your names, if you would.
Small Donahue.
Okay, and you are?
Mary Small Donahue.
Okay.
Fraser.
Fraser, okay. All right, that's all right. And now what is your relationship to Rainsford Island, which is where we're standing right now?
Our mother, Josephine Costello, was the daughter of the last caretaker, James F. Costello, here in the 1920s.
What was the year that he lived? Do you remember?
We think between 1919 and 1930.
And he was the caretaker for the island?
Caretaker for the city of Boston. He was a home.
And what was Do you know what was on the island at that time? Were there any schools still left, or was it mostly
The
just?
school buildings were still here, I would say. Okay. And the Chicken General's house?
Yes.
And I don't recall, she said there was at least one pier. There may have been two. I don't recall that she said other buildings. No, she didn't do it. She didn't mention any other buildings. Oh,
Big
concrete
days.
In the 1840s, Sylvester Thayer worked for the Army and he was in fortifications in the U.S. And this is one of the fortifications that he built. He and George Lapp designed it. Granite blocks on there was actually a retaining wall here. And when I was here, these three tiers of rock were down here. Now they're all gone. Washed out. It's the stones we've had over the years. So basically, the island's going to stop to wear away.
Let's see if I can prevent that.
Yeah, there's some big rocks. And the one that is crazy granite, stuff that is sort of a pinkish hue, that was quarried in Quincy. Quarry's still there.
Tell me again why the city burned down the house. Do you know?
We're not sure, but they were, I think, it was after Prohibition and everything. So they didn't have to guard the islands anymore. So I think the city just didn't want vandalism, so they just torched to it, which was a shame, but they did. As far as I know, my grandparents were not given any fire books.
They just burned it. They just burned it down.
Yeah. And I guess he was out of job. He returned to the city of Boston.
And every time I hear about Tripoli and West Nile, I think about Rainsford because the people here, especially the intrepid musicians who worked here in the late 1700s, John Jeffries, for example, behind me is the burying ground where many people are buried. We know that at least 800 people's graves were visible in 1832, and subsequently many people died here in the hospitals. And as far as the gravestones, none of them has survived in this place, but certainly they may exist elsewhere.
So that was a little movie of some of the film that's been collected. As you can tell, it's very rough. Those interviews were done, I forgot to put in the dates, but 2010, 2012. And I think you can see the value of oral histories. People have very vivid memories. They can talk about these really interesting things that are very important, but memory is also difficult. You can tell some of the people didn't remember where their houses were. They will talk about whether she remembers the house was burned down in Rainsford. I don't know if I were to put that in a book, I'd have to try to verify that. So memories have a lot of purpose in creating history, but they're only one aspect of memories, but they're very important. And so I want to point out a source for you in terms of oral histories or visual histories of the Boston Harbor Islands, which is the Mass Memories Roadshow that was done. Suzanne really worked with them. And if you go to this website that's right here, you can find all sorts of great memories that are there. Again, it's a little piecemeal. it's not a systematic thing, but that's not the point of oral history. It is giving you a feeling and a sense of what it was like, not just the dates, not just the official history, but kind of the sense of what it was like to be out on those islands at that time. This is another example of kind of oral history in a way. This is from, I think, a 1985 Tidings. And it's someone talking about Spectacle Island, and they talk about being there in 1934 and having a mildly pungent odor of the island. And I think a lot of us think of Spectacle Island as something as being this dump or this area of refuge. But we know from other people that it wasn't all like that. And today it's all beautified and things like that. But one of the things that we have are the memories of some of our members. Now, I don't know if Kate wants to read a little piece that we have up here, but she sent me this memory. If you want to, let's see, you'll have to go off mute. Let me unmute you. Make sure you're on. So
I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted. Great. So if you want to read this part,
okay,
give us a bit of a history here.
Okay. So I just put this together last night, just random thoughts that I have about an hour to send out to you. And I'm happy, I'm especially happy now that I did that, because in getting ready for tonight, the possibility that I'd be reading this, I was looking at pictures. I have so many pictures. I have my grandmother who lived on Spectacle. Her brother was like one of the first studio photographers in the city. And so they had cameras. So I have a lot of pictures, but I had no idea that I would be doing this tonight. So I don't have them, but some of those. And then I also discovered pictures that I thought I had lost forever. And they're actually, Mass Memories has them. The archive has them. I honestly don't know how they got out of my hands to them, but I'm going to find that out. So anyway, and I wish we had pictures, because what you
next time, we'll do it next time.
Okay, next time. So because what you would see is that Spectacle has had a lot of varied aspects to it. And in fact, people who lived on Spectacle didn't call the whole island Spectacle. Spectacle was the South Drumlin. And what people said was, well, we live on Spectacle Island and the factories are on wards. So that was the other side of the island when I was a kid. My family was there from about 1929 to about 55. So 29 after the Depression. And at some point, I think it was in 1922, one part of the Northern Drumlin was deemed to be a good place to put trash. And as my father used to say, remember, Katie, that was trash. It wasn't pink plastic tampons and baby diapers. It was before plastic and before all of that. He said, so there was much of what went out there, at least in the first couple of decades, was paper and cardboard and things like that. So people have a particular image of Spectacle, and I'm sure that once it was making glue and rendering horses, that sometimes it smelled pretty bad, but that was never anything that any of my siblings can remember on my parents. So anyway, so that's the deal. So a lot of you have probably been to Spectacle by now, and if so, you know how beautiful and spacious it is now, with trees and flowers and pathways and views of shorelines and the inner harbor, and that's not Spectacle. So should I be talking about Spectacle?
No, let me,
I can wait.
Let me, what I'd like to do, I'd like to read this last sentence that you wrote, because I thought it was very interesting.
Okay.
About you. I said, I'm just going to read your words. And you said, I once asked my father what it was like to live on Spectacle. Well, honey, we were there since I was 12. We lived on an island. We had ponies and tugboats. We swam and fished and played around on boats and skated in the winter. And what do you think it was like? For me, it was like heaven. And I think that's, it kind of flies in the face to the way we think about Spectacle Island. So it's a beautiful, beautiful memory. So maybe we can return to this topic with pictures one of these days, because our idea is we want to keep building on these oral histories because they're very important. Okay. So let me go ahead.
So just before we go, I want to say that that's what my father thought, and I would have said the same thing, because I was there until I was about 11, and my brothers and sisters were there with me, and we've been talking about it a little bit these days, and we had, it really was wonderful for us. You know, we had beaches, we lived in the projects in South Boston, and the yard was concrete with a little chain link fence around it. And here we could walk down to Kelly's Landing, get on a boat, come across, and have trees and pheasants and blackberries and fish and stuff. And it wasn't all that different from my father's time, only nicer, much sweeter.
Excellent, excellent. Well, here's another one of these kind of unusual memories, since Suzanne brought this to my attention, and it's a memory from Brian McCarthy, and it's about Dennis McCarthy, his grandfather, I believe, and his grandparents lived in Governor's Island for 2 decades, and he gives us some background about that there was a fort there before it became the airport, but that his grandfather was cited for rescuing a young woman who fell off a boat. And I think these are all kind of important things, but I love this little description here about when he was a teen, that he would walk on the island. They'd spend the day with picnic sandwiches, and they would explore. And then when the harbor was being dredged, they were creating these deep channels. And let me read what he says about that. The dredges also produced mud that at low tide spread all over the flats of East Boston. This mud had a singular texture, runny and smooth. Young folks such as myself at low tide would lay on it, on our backs to the mud. By foot thrust, we then propelled ourselves through this soft stuff toward the deep channels created by the dredges. On the way, we accumulated a lot of the slippery gray stuff on our bodies, in our hair, and even in our swim trunks. But then when we hit the channels, we dove in and cleaned ourselves in the cool, clean waters there. And I just think this is so evocative, because again, it's a different way of looking at the waters of Boston Harbor and the mud flats that were out there. And these are the kind of word pictures that we can form. And this is Governor's Island. And you don't hear too much about Governors because it's all covered up by Logan Airport. But there's, again, quite a history there that only exists in these kind of memories. And that's why it's important for us to preserve them. Another little memory, I think we all know Laura Thibodeau Jones, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And she's written a book, if I can, it tends to blur out. Let me put it in front of my face. And it's just filled with these kind of memories. And so let me just read one of those from her book. Grandmother would talk about the island, because she lived out in the islands, and she describes her experience. Grandmother would talk about the island, saying it was a hard life for the adults, but as a child growing up, it was a time one could never replace or understand in any story told. She told me about how her father would row to Boston every week to trade his lobsters and fish for supplies, lard, milk, vegetables. It sounded like a fun time for my grandmother, waiting to see just what treat, if any, he would bring back for the children. I never understood the importance of her telling me how her dad rowed to Boston. Have you ever tried rowing? Ever been to the Boston Harbor Islands? Try putting a dory in the water, hopefully on a calm day, full of items to sell, and then row to Boston. Try it now. Imagine it's 1908 or so. Anyway, complaining about catching a bus or food shopping seems just a little bit petty or simply embarrassing. They probably felt lucky to have transportation, no matter how difficult it must have been. So again, we get an insight into things, you know, so the next time you're complaining about the traffic for shopping, just be glad you're not rowing to the grocery store. One of the books that the Friends have made an effort to preserve is this book, A Lighthouse Family, which is about growing up on Lowell's Island by the son of the lighthouse keeper there. And we've done a lot of work on Lowell, and we've made a lot of efforts to try to preserve the oil house, which is this building right here in the corner here. It's the only thing left of this entire complex. It's the only thing left. And there's some wonderful, if you get a chance to read this book, there's some wonderful memories, but this is one of my favorites because it really speaks to this issue about buried treasure. And remember, I talked about this, that Edward O. Schorow actually dug up buried treasure. At least he says he did, but he seems to have photos to prove it. But this is a great memory about that. Dad would have a garden every summer on the island. During the winter months, the waves from the storms would splash over the seawall and fill the center part of the island. The center part of the island was very hollow, and as the waves would fill in the center, the water would bubble up. Air and nitrogen would come up, and it was almost like cultivating the garden. There was a French sailing vessel, the Magnifique, that ran aground in the 1700s. She was a pirate raider, and it had a lot of treasure. I don't know whatever happened to the treasure, but there are always talk that the crew buried money on the island. Every spring, my dad would dig up a coin, and the oldest coin we have is dated 1600. So the treasure had to be buried there somewhere. No one knows where. There's a story that goes with it. The assistant keeper came to relieve Dad for a vacation and asked about the hole that had been dug in the garden. Dad showed 2 coins. Dad said jokingly, "That's where the treasure is buried." When Dad got back from vacation, the hole was bigger, and the assistant keeper retired a few months later. You can take it from there. I often wondered where my buried treasure is. As a lad, I put a note and some pretty stones from the beach into a tobacco can, which I buried on the hill next to Lover's Rock. I must go back someday and search. And so it's a beautiful thing about that. And in the book, let me see, he actually has pictures of the coins. So that's how we know there actually were coins, but we don't know if this assistant lighthouse keeper went off and lived in luxury, perhaps in the Caribbean, we don't know. But so again, if you're writing about it in a book, if you're writing in a scholarly treatise, you have to check it out. You have to make sure it's accurate. But in an oral history, you can accept it for what it is, a very wonderful, almost treasured memory of a family that gets passed down over and over again. There's other kinds of oral histories that we can talk about. And this is one, I'm pulling it out of Edward Rose Snow's book about the islands of Boston Harbor. And this is from diaries and other documents that were kept. And it's about the time on the island of George's Island. We're going to switch to George's Island now, where there were Confederate soldiers. Now, let me say something about that, because how we might have interpreted the Confederacy in Edward Rose Snow's day may not be the same way we interpret the Confederacy today and the people who fought for the Confederate Army. I'm not saying either is right or wrong. I'm just saying we might look at things a little bit differently. So we might go back to some of the old material and look at it with fresh eyes. What was interesting was how Edward Rose Snow pulled from the diaries. Let's see if I can find it here. The diaries of some of the Confederate prisoners of war here. He has one section from Lawrence Sangston, who was a former member of the Maryland legislature. He had been confined with 100 other Southern civilians at Fort Lafayette, and then he was taken to Fort Warren. He arrived there on October 31st, 1861. And in his diary, he talks about his bitterness. But as it turned out, he was treated pretty bad. For example, this is how Snow describes this diary. The next morning, Sangston arose early and began to realize that the prisoners were going to be accorded much better treatment than they had received at Fort Lafayette. The officers appeared to understand their position. This is from his diary, and he expresses delight at the speed in which supplies ordered from Boston were received. Here's an actual entry from the diary. Storm increasing, fearful night for ships on the coast. At times the wind would whistle through the casement windows, equal to the shrill whistle of a locomotive engine. And after listening an hour to the howling of the storm and the waves breaking over the rocks, went to sleep. Now, what we can also gather from this diary is that maybe it was not so great being a prisoner, but it wasn't so tough either. For example, here's how Sangston wrote about being in the prison. At 4:30, when we leave the parade grounds and retire to our rooms, and the sentinels are drawn to our door, I trim and light my lamp and prepare my writing table for those who wish to write or read in quiet, leaving the front room for conversations and the backgammon players. The only game we have, as there is not enough card players among us to make up a game. At 10 o'clock, I brew a pitcher of hot whiskey punch, which we sip until 11. Colonel Pegram, the only one among us who does not partake of the punch, gives us some very fine music from his guitar, and we put the light out and go to bed. So as you can see from, this is not an oral history, it's written history, but it is a personal history. And again, when we look at these things, we have to weigh this with what we know now about the Confederacy and what a general or this army person would write. Did he write honestly? Did he have a purpose in mind? A lot of people wrote diaries, not just for themselves, but they were public documents. They were to be shared with people later. And certainly this went on to be published. And this is why Edward Rowe Snow has it. But there are a lot of these kinds of histories that we can use to paint a picture of what's going on way back in the 1860s here. Which brings me to a pitch. And I want to pitch this to the group here. And that's the material in the Great Brewster Diary that I've talked about here. We are, the friends are now going to republish this diary. We're going to take it, we're going to reproduce it, we're going to transcribe it so you can read it very carefully, and we're going to comment on it, but we're going to let the words of the women, for the most part, speak for themselves. We'll do a little research, but we're not going to interpret the diary. We're going to present it kind of as a oral project. In other words, it is, oh God, I don't believe I'm going to say this, but it is what it is. It is its own record, and you can read it and make up your own mind about what goes on there. I think it's interesting to look at, for example, the clues you can get from this. If you look at this picture here, for example, you notice there's one house on the island. And I think I showed you the pictures with many houses there. I don't think this house, oops, there we go, was that big, but it shows the importance of it. And here's that lobster, kind of like later, one of the ladies with her grandmother would bargain for lobsters from the fishermen. So what we're going to do is continue this tradition of gathering histories and presenting them. And as Kate sort of showed us, there's so many out there. There's still a lot out there. And so my recommendation is that you, people are listening, you write down your own histories. You keep them, right? Kate started that, other people. Walter, I know you want to do this. I know you want to do it. Write down your own history, save those photos, scan them so you don't lose them. And then we can somehow keep them together and keep them going. There's one, I'm not going to read from it because we're gonna, but there's other things. There's even this book called First Light which is the remembrance of Storm Child, who grew up in the lighthouse. She was kind of famous, but then there was a novel about it, but then people went back to talk about what really happened on this island. In fact, I will read one little part to it because it's kind of interesting, but this is from Storm Child. In fact, I think I have I do have a slide here. She lived in Boston. And so she's writing about something that we know about from other histories. Jeremy D'Entremont has written extensively, I believe, and so has Edward Gross Snow, about the shipwrecks in the harbor. We knew there were a lot of shipwrecks in the harbor, but this is an actual reminiscence of what it was like to see one. And this is by one of the children who grew up on this island. The city of Salisbury, a British freighter going to Boston from India, went aground in Graves Light's ledge. We could see it from the tower, but not very well. Daddy took us to see it that afternoon. It hit the ledge in the fog at high tide. When the tide went out, the freighter split in half nearly all the way. A pipeline ruptured, and there was oil in the water from it. One place in the hold, we could see coal. In order to lighten the ship, they had thrown out a lot of the cargo overboard. Boxes and bales of stuff floated about. Daddy pulled in a huge box marked tea and another marked coconut, and we went home. The box of tea had taken in water in one corner, but the rest was okay. Everyone went home for jugs and cans and had tea for quite some time. The coconut was shredded and the whole amount was pretty well saturated with salt water. Daddy tried to fix some with sugar, but it was not fit to eat. We children wondered if it was proper to take those things, even though there were many fishermen also getting some. Daddy said that the cargo left in the water any length of time would soon spoil, and there were state laws having something to do with claiming salvage in situations like this. Years later, I read some of those laws, but can't remember exactly what they said. I know anyone finding boats adrift, as we did the one called Who Cares, can claim salvage, but no one ever did, knowing that it might be our boat lost next. It was common courtesy to return boats and gear if you found out who owned them. So again, these are the memories, little bits and pieces of history, and they're as valid as some of the more official history of the islands. They are a little problematic because you have to fact check them in a certain way to include them, but they are very important to creating a whole picture of the islands. And I think, again, to plug our little project, and if you're interested in working with me on that, please put your email in the chat. I'm going to look at the chat. It's got some things there. In fact, I'm going to get out of this right now and look at the chat. But please let me know, because we're going to be recruiting people. We're all going to work on this project together. And I think this will be a great experience for Friends of the Boston Harbor Islands to create this history, kind of like at the Mass Memories Roadshow, but in a more kind of more systematic way. So that's my presentation. I'll keep it a little short since it's only a few of us. Let me look at the chat because I see some really interesting things in there. Okay, Suzanne has a link for a video of Kate about spectacle, which is great. And she also has some information about the piece I read from Governor's Island. It was a family history by Dennis, Bridget, and Governor's Island, written by Brian Winston McCarthy, grandson of Dennis and Bridget McCarthy, and some other. So if you have any other resources or you want to keep in touch about working on this project, please put your email in the chat and I will be in touch with you. And let me pause now and see if there's any questions. Does anyone have any thoughts about this? Or any questions? Anybody want to share another memory? I mean, Kate has shared hers. Anyone else wants to share a memory that they think is something that you might not get in an official history, but is important to our understanding of the islands? Don't speak all at once there. I mean, I think, again, let me tell you a few details about that video. For example, first of all, it's very rough. I hope you guys aren't thinking I'm Spielberg or anything like that. Although it does use the Ken Burns effects, because you know when the pictures move like that, it actually says Ken Burns effect in there. But those videos were put together. This, as you can see, the sound quality is dreadful. It really is. The stuff, I took some of those videos. Some of them were taken by, I believe they were students. And it's really bad. So really, to do that right, to make a real video, you need, it's actually better to do it not on the island, get what they call B-roll on the island, and get someone in the studio and get very good quality audio, because you can always put images behind it. But that's something that it comes with a lot of work. And I had a lot of fun putting that together. I had to kind of teach myself iMovie as we went along, so I apologize for that. The other thing I want to mention is those pictures of Great Brewster Island, those pictures. I put them in there. They aren't necessarily matched up. I'm not, like the picture of the dog, I'm not sure that was Bum, who died from the disease seagull, but someone I had gotten this picture of a family with a dog, so it could have very well been Bum, but it matched up. And so I think more detective work would be needed if we were to expand that video to look at those images and match them up with people. And a word about those images, those were just things that people brought to the island, and I would snap pictures of the pictures. So they're not actually, we would need better quality to really create like a full-fledged video. But I think what's interesting about it is that you'll note that it gets a little tedious if you just hear someone going on and on and on. It's good to break it up with some images and other things. So that was my effort to do that. But it is something that I think can be another thing that the Friends can be doing. And in terms of preserving these memories of people, particularly things that don't appear like in the official history. Any questions? Walter, I know you have a burning question. So unmute yourself and ask it, please.
Actually, I do not, although I know I'm pretty sure we have a lot more of these oral histories on that have been recorded and put onto modern media, and that's a project for another day. The history project of the four women looks to be very interesting, and I'm excited for that. And we're gonna hopefully do a little something special for that as well. Yeah, I mean, we've all got our version of memories of the Harbor Islands, and they're no less important than, as you've been saying, the official record.
But they are contradictory. That's the challenge when you do or any kind of history or witnessing. People remember things different ways.
Yep.
And they remember my house was here, and there's no way the house was here. It was somewhere else. But your memory remember it that way. So that's like the well on Great Brewster. Does anyone know where there's a well there? I've seen so many pictures of it now. And I really like to find out where it is.
Right. Well, and I mean, I have a memory of Outer Brewster Harbor, or Outer Brewster Island, and climbing up the little path that in the middle of the island, and then climbing on top of or through the gun emplacements, on top of the dormitory and the cafeteria building. All the while, there's a big sign saying "Keep out, danger." And the doors have been broken down long ago, and the view from on top of those buildings of the harbor is spectacular. And I'm pretty sure there are very few people that are able to get out there. Lots of graffiti, which is historic in its own sense. And I'm imagining that a lot of those people that had left the graffiti were probably from Hull, young people. And it just, the history of that island by itself is going to be pretty interesting. So, yeah.
Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned graffiti because there, you know, that picture I had of governors filled with graffiti. I don't know if it's our cave person instinct that when we painted on cave walls, but the other week I was in California and I went hiking with my brother in an area where there was an old abandoned train track right through the mountains, and it was built in like the 1840s. It was a tremendous engineering feat, and because they blasted right through the mountain and built over it because of the snow, just make sure that the train could always pass through. And so you could hike through it, and you needed a flashlight because at times it was so dark, you had to kind of stumble your way through it. The place was filled with graffiti and all over the place, and some really nice pieces of graffiti, if you like that. But it was just amazing that you can't, everywhere there was a blank wall, someone had painted something on it. So it's funny that this instinct to do this goes way back, even to like in Governor's Island, that whole image was filled with drawings and things like that. So so that's our next book, The Graffiti of the Harbor Islands, and the artwork.
Fort Revere for that one.
That's right. So are there any other questions? We're going to keep it a little short tonight, but I hope you enjoyed the video. Kate, do you have something you want to say? Please.
Oh, good. I figured out how to get your attention.
Yeah, no problem.
I don't have a question. I have a comment about the transition between oral history and actual history. Like somebody makes a determination that one is more truth or more value or something than the other. Because one of the things that I know is that the people who lived on Spectacle, and I did a reunion once with the people who lived there when my father was growing up. So there were a lot of people, and 15 years ago who were still alive, and I did a reunion for those guys. And people told me something that I had heard from my family a lot, and that is that nobody on Spectacle, nobody who lived on the Southern Drumlin, nobody who lived where people lived, called the other part of the island Spectacle. Mm-hmm. It was called, we live on Spectacle, that's Wards.
I see.
Or as we were trained, the other side. And right. I was literally once in my lifetime, so that's like 12 years going out there, only once was I allowed on the other side, which was the time when there was a very large group of Portuguese men of war, and my father thought that we should see that, like it was biologically interesting, so he brought us all over there. But so in a time like that, who decides if that's a true thing?
Exactly. Yeah, we don't. I think what we are moving toward, generally speaking, I can speak for the academic world, is to do more thinking about using and incorporating oral histories or people's history
right.
Into official history. Partly because that's the only way you can bring in voices of women,
yep.
minorities,
mm-hmm.
Black people, Indigenous people. Poor people, exactly. We can bring in those voices as opposed to just the wealthy or the rich who could afford to write those histories. Mm-hmm. I think we are moving in that direction, definitely, to have that. I mean, in the sense of what I see coming out in terms of historical records and as books and historical mm-hmm. documents. So. I think that's.
Well, thank you. This was great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, well, I really thank you so much. This is the last of our series, and I really appreciate everyone's intention for letting me do this. And I hope to see you at our annual meeting, which is remind me of the date. Somebody.
23rd.
October 23rd. Is that it?
I think so.
Because I think we're going to have a conversation with an author of a book about the Harbor Islands, which is about how the islands were sort of part of the greater city. And I'm really anxious to read that book. It seems fascinating. And so we'll have a great Zoom and conversation about that, again, enhancing the history. So thank you so much, for coming. I am going to end the recording. We are done. We are finished.